Since you're all sitting, I'll jump right up and dive right into this. Get everyone going. So, the next session of the discussions today, we're going to talk about managing live signals in an increasingly IP-based world, the live aspects of this. My name is James Stellpflug. I'm the VP of Product Marketing for EVS, and we're one of those companies that provides solutions in that live space, the live production tools. We've historically built replay servers and the live content tools for all of the biggest events on a global scale. I've been happy to be with EVS for about the last 16 years in various roles. Currently, I do product marketing for the company. And one of the biggest aspects we look at here, and the topic of today, is talking about building these next generation of IP routing facilities for live production. The aspects of how are we going to do this, what's ready, where are we at, and the interoperability we're talking about. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is why has SDI been so good for our industry? Because there's got to be a reason why we want to move to this next generation system, but it's still important to understand why SDI was really, really good. So when we look back at that, we talk about interoperability, right? You can buy gear, you can plug it together, and you have no doubts the fact that it's going to work. The fact that it's that plug and play on that interoperability between the vendors, it's easy to troubleshoot, right? You had a point-to-point cable, you know where you could go after the connection, you could solve it. So we had that simple ways to troubleshoot and simple routing, right? We didn't have big complex methodologies for how we had to do that. SDI has been great for those different aspects. So the question is, why would we want to move away from SDI? Why would we look at IP for these real-time operations? You know, this thing that's mission critical, this stuff that has to execute. So the domain that EVS works in this topic is the fact that it never stops. You're always live, so you have to execute. So one of the big reasons I like to say is that why should we move to IP? Because we can. Because the technology is there, the standards exist. And the implementations we're showing here, the different interoperability, and at all of our vendors' booths, is the topics that we have the building blocks. With those building blocks and with the constraints we can put together for the broadcast industry and the media and entertainment space, we can build these real systems. It's not a future thing, it's here today. So the rise of IP has been coming for a long time. It's not something that started last week, started at IBC or last year at NAB. It's been around for a long time. IP is nothing new. So for some of the places that we at EVS oscillate, we talk about broadcast centers, production trucks, and venues. IP is already in place for connecting things together, connecting workflows, user interfaces, moving files around. So IP is nothing new to our industry. It's something that's already been enabling us, giving us huge windfalls in terms of efficiency, where staff can operate, and how we can tell and execute better stories for live events because of this interconnection leveraging IP. And when we look at the newer markets today where consumers are expecting content, IP is bringing huge windfalls in terms of delivering video on demand, live streaming, the ability to take live content, live execution, and reach every fan on a global scale, all enabled by the IP backend systems. So IP is nothing new. It's something we've been using. It's something that we've really mastered in many different facets. But the next last bastion is live, right? The infrastructure, the production trucks, the broadcast centers, the facilities. The point where SDI is still commonplace today, we need to know that we can break down those walls and we can start building that plant with IP and trust it. And as we're looking at this, really the success factors that we've talked about on our side is the fact that we need to be able to think different about the way we design a facility, right? SDI was great for us. SDI fit a certain model. But as we move into IP, we shouldn't mimic the old-fashioned constraints. We shouldn't build the facility exactly the way we used to. We have to think different because IP enables us to go far beyond the way we used to work in SDI. We know that we have challenges in letting our engineering staff, our facilities, and the implementers to gain better skills as to how they deploy the system. Not every facility has the right IT experts to build it, so there is knowledge there that has to be built up. I think most importantly, all of us have to be able to make money. You're not going to build a facility on IP just because you can, like my slide said. We all have to be able to make sure this is going to give us efficiency. It's going to let us build that facility to execute, let us save time with people, various reasons. We have to be able to make money from that facility, not be an early adopter and waste money that we have to replace in 2 years. We need a common language because as all of the different vendors here you're seeing, we need to have interoperable standards. We need to make sure that we can talk together, that you can buy those devices like the interoperability I said that SDI was so good at. You need to be able to have that common language of dialogue, of protocols, and methodologies so your facility just works. And support bandwidth, because one of the biggest concerns everyone talks about with IP is that everyone doesn't trust the IT realm. They're concerned about whether the fact that that switch is going to deliver that flow of traffic between the camera and the switcher, or from the different devices in the production system successfully, that the bandwidth is guaranteed, that the system will deliver it and you can execute. There's that traditional feeling that you talk to that IT department in your corporate facility, all the times your laptop doesn't connect, you can't reach the files you need to reach, or there's someone else on the Wi-Fi streaming Netflix and they're affecting something else. So we all have fears, and there's a lot of people who are concerned that that IP fabric is going to deliver and support the bandwidth needs to execute. And those are natural. So the success factors have to reinforce all these points so we can get to the next step. And the important thing I like to say about thinking different, and I kind of touched on it before, and I use the example of the London fires of the past. When something burns down and you have to rebuild after you're doing that, or when you're thinking about building a brand new facility, you have two choices. You can rebuild it exactly as it was before, or you can look at the challenges and the problems of the traffic flow and the buildings and the plumbing and the electricity, and you can think different about how you should build it better the next time. So as we're at that intersection from moving from an SDI style of design, moving into an IP domain, we shouldn't necessarily cling to the old-fashioned things that were comfortable, because maybe it doesn't serve us for the next 20 to 30 to 40 years. We need to have a facility that thinks different, that implements because of the benefits of IP, and lets us build that next generation of facility that will scale with us and last for many more years than an old kind of bespoke, dedicated piece of hardware would have ever been able to deliver for us. So as we're looking at this, there's a lot of different gains and benefits and things we need to be able to tap into as we build an IP system and get to the next generation. Some of the statements you hear out here is that AMWA has some great summaries here of when we go beyond the IP protocol, the different benefits and things that we need to be able to capitalize on in this space. We talk about commodity infrastructure, right? There was a time where these dedicated proprietary boxes were great for us in certain cases, and we as EVS were a manufacturer building some of those dedicated appliances, but we now need to leverage that commodity infrastructure. There's a larger industry we can tap into, and the processing power, the benefits are there. You can build a system with commodity system hardware. Support for multiple formats, current and future, right? Long gone are the days when I entered the industry where we had one video standard, and then we transitioned to a second video standard later. Now we're working in production ecosystems where I talk about SD, HD, 1080p, 4K, 8K, and gaming systems and non-standard formats. It's multiplying every year. So we have to be able to have an infrastructure that is not bound by one standard, that lets my domain change and evolve with me depending on how my business needs oscillate. Flexibility of location, so distributed infrastructure is huge. With SDI, you had limits, how far you could go. You had constraints of how you would build, how you would design. And as we look at how you build facilities now, usually you build a studio next to an engineering rack that was very close because SDI could only go so far. But as you get into IP, that constraint goes away. I can consider things down the street, miles away, around the globe. So geographically distributed, whether it's within a building in a facility, a multimedia campus, or globally, distributed infrastructure is key, and IP gets us there. On-demand provisioning, right? So as we move into breaking down these barriers of IP, the next step is now we can get into virtualization. We can get into faster deployment. We can get to the point where I can start and instantiate service-based approaches, functional things that can be started and stopped on demand of my business, not on the capital investment cycles. More scope for the automation of tasks, things that can be performing themselves and executing what I need in terms of my production space when I need it. We need to be able to automate things so that we can be more efficient with where creative people and staff and production teams should execute. But most importantly, we need to simplify the integration with the IP-based delivery, right? Those barriers are going away, where I had a production system and I did a linear output to a transmitter, or I had a production system and I had a linear output that I streamed to the web. More and more now, that's not a one-to-many type of model. It's becoming a one-to-one content personalization. So the IP fabric that I build for a production center has to be able to scale out and deliver content to many more endpoints in parallel. I should be able to reach those audiences and deliver new customized, more hyper-personalized sets of content because of metadata, because of the content video formats. And when I start implementing and integrating these IP-based facilities, delivery can now be inherent in the fabric and the facility that I design. So all of these points are important to go beyond just the technical protocols that we've all heard about for the last few years. It's more about the business of what we do with it as the next steps. So one of the critical layers when we look at the infrastructure side is really based upon software-defined networking, right? Those off-the-shelf switches and that more commodity hardware that's out there is important, but we need to be able to control that infrastructure. It has to do what we as facility companies, as broadcasters, as content creators, we need that facility to execute what it is that our business needs have. And software-defined networking is the key building block, and how we tell those switches that are executing the interoperability over here to deliver the flows and to do it in a way that we need to guarantee the bandwidth that every single endpoint that needs it is receiving the content and flows. Admission control, right? SDI had nothing. You plugged it in, there's a flow moving in one direction, you didn't care because it was point to point. But now we have a fabric of objects moving around. You have things that can be plugged in and contributed that might not be acceptable in your facility. Maybe it's the wrong video standard of objects. Maybe it's an illegal signal. Maybe it's some wild device you've plugged in. We need to be able to have that kind of TSA channel there so that we're knowing what's entering our facility. Because I like those analogies of the airport. They're very logical for the way we work, and the similar needs happen in IP. I only want to let the right flows and objects talk to my devices and get into my network where I need them to be operating. And when we start looking at these spine and leaf and this more network-based design and architecture, we talk about network healing. It's the fact that we can build a facility here now that has a completely different level that I never had before with SDI. The fact that I can design it in place so I can monitor the bandwidth. If a link is broken, the system can automatically heal itself and deliver content from a source to a destination very reliably. But the tools that we put in place need to be able to give us that visibility when something is down. So I can troubleshoot it in a familiar way that a broadcast-minded entity would want to treat the infrastructure. It has to feel comfortable to the way we still used to work while taking advantage of the benefits going forward of a much more robust facility than SDI could have ever given us in a single rack and a single frame. When we look at this, one of the important things on the IP space is that a broadcast-minded person doesn't feel like they have the right visibility, the right monitoring, the right telemetry to know what's actually going on in those switches. You can't expect them to dial into a command line interface or to look at multiple IT-based views to see what's going on. So for us, we think it's important that the industry needs those right broadcast-friendly tool sets to put it in context of how that broadcast facility is meant to execute. And lifecycle management is really true the gain that we need to have because of IP. If I build this facility that starts small today, I don't want to come back in 3 years and pull out that device and replace it with a completely new thing for all of my routing of flows. I want to be able to have a facility that's based on that leveraged aspect that the IT industry has, where I can scale to whatever size I need to scale to at whatever pace my business is at. So we're talking about a life cycle of an infrastructure that doesn't have an endpoint. I can simply keep replacing the piece where I need it and scale that thing to massive scale that goes far beyond any video router you've ever thought about ever before. So when we look now at the space of an IP infrastructure, we can go way beyond the boundaries that we used to have for the entire infrastructure building. And the best part I like to talk about is that IP and protocols are great, and the interoperability we have over here is fantastic. And what we can do with IP is a great step for breaking down the barriers of infrastructure. But because of IP, because we've gotten rid of those dedicated point-to-point interfaces on devices, now we can talk about elastic production, a facility that leverages those IP connections and now builds an execution model that lets me start and stop and move my production tool sets in a back-end way that leverages that IP backbone. So now I'm not bound by constraints of rack and stack gear or dedicated boxes or any of those things. Elastic production and the ability to go way beyond the business constraints of capital investment are now employed because we've moved to IP. So really, in conclusion there, we're talking about lower setup times, configuration. We need those multi-vendor systems. You've heard me and others talk about it. We need this interoperability, and we need to know that you can buy the best of breed or whatever solution you need for your facility. You want to leverage that flexibility that IP provides, scaling the business, scaling the infrastructure, and then building the right systems. And really, as I talked about, that broadcast-friendly abstraction. Make it familiar to the people that have been executing the facilities of the past in the way that they think about visibility, control, patching, and visualizations, and prepare for the next steps, the automation, the converged infrastructure, and ultimately down to the elastic production. So for us at EVS, we've done white papers, many others have done it. We invite you to go to our website or come down to our booth in South Lower. We'd like to talk more about these topics. We and other members here are showing interoperability and showing how IP is changing the game, the way we build systems. And there's a lot of learning out there from us and other vendors. Please read up, please ask questions. I appreciate the time listening to the discussion today. And I got to give the nice plug here. There's lots more sessions, lots of fantastic topics. Keep sticking around here now, come back later, pick up one of these guides on the front and find out about other topics around IP that are going to help us transition our industry to the next step. So my name is James Stellpflug with EVS. I appreciate the time and listening to me during this session. Have a great NAB.